with?
Oh wait, did I?
Okay.
So I'm trying to go live.
Okay.
Give
But
me.
okay,
Yeah.
before you go, do you have any specific topic in mind? Or are you just going to lead by? So it's better if you lead. I haven't had the time to prepare like last week,
Okay,
but I can, of course, chime in
I see.
and then basically lead the way, Commander.
Okay, cool. Um, I'm not so sure. Give me a second. If the okay, so the streaming is going on now. Cool. I'll leave that behind. I'll leave the OBS behind. Um, and get back to okay. So assuming everything else is happening fine and the audio levels etc. are also fine, let's start with an introduction, which is gonna be awkward anyway. Hello and welcome everyone. We are continuing forward from our last session, which was the introduction. So probably, hopefully, this time we'll have a little bit nicer grip on the topic or discussion and the flow of it. With that said, topics, right? I have roughly three topics. The first one is that you remember we were talking about how do we demystify the concept that are inherently nebulous, things like philosophy. How do we make it more scientific, or to preach to people that want to understand things in a logical, rational, measurable, or quantifiable manner? So I can give a couple of examples of that kind of approach working. So I'll run that through. And the second one is tomorrow is actually uh, death centenary, like anniversary, 100 years of Shukumar Rai's death. So he is a huge impact in my life. So I've been thinking of like paying some kind of homage. Like I don't know exactly what in what way and what is appropriate and what I'm capable of, but in some way, like at least remember trying to remember him. And the third one is kind of chalking out the lay of the land of metaphysics in a sense, like what are the things that is worth covering that needs a modern reinterpretation, or that what we can kind of talk about or reflect on, and what are the things, especially like trying to find the out. I'm very concerned, like what if there are things like blind spots that I have absolutely no clue about not knowing, essentially. So what are the things that I need to upgrade myself about as well? So that is basically like putting each other on each other's blind spot and finding out like what are the things that we both need to kind of build up, so that then we can start filling up the details. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, but the pieces are old. We need to create new pieces that are not different, but the reinterpretation that fits better right now, essentially. Something that we can, distilled version, like a pure version that we can also consolidate. So those are the three topics that I'm thinking. What, like, how do you think?
Yeah, I think good. I would, however, switch the order and put Shukumarai first, and then progressively from there, because I feel
Okay.
like that itself is like the seed to begin with.
It is in a meta sense. It is the very reason যে আমি এক আমি অ্যাজ ইন আমি প্রচন্ড রকমের এখানটাতে লাইক সেলফিশ ওয়েতে আমি বলবো, তার কারণ হচ্ছে আই ডোন্ট নো মেনি পিপল হু হ্যাভ ওয়ার্ক দ্য সিমিলার কাইন্ড অফ পাথওয়ে, রাইট? সো ইন দ্যাট সেন্স যে grown up in an environment that is kind of academic, but has have seen like or perceived the necessity to become a careerist, but then again understood the necessity of the concept of absurdism, like the surrealism, like why at which point that rampant rationalism falls apart and you need that like support of the fun in life, without which you can't proceed. Like life becomes very bleak. You cannot rationalize that part. Sometimes no matter how well you do things, you still lose, at which point all you can do is laugh at it. And like I'm probably not putting it the right way, but I've seen that thing, and it was always challenging. I've seen people at various order, like various spectrum, but not most of the time I didn't see many people who covered the whole spectrum, whole of it. So it was always challenging for me to communicate with people on the entire spectrum, who understand the rational world as well as Birale Talibush. So that part is where I come along. So not only the challenge that I have is exactly that you are saying, is that I can not put that into words, partially because I have no practice of it. I haven't spoken to people whom I can talk about it, because there was no option for that. Now I am going to hand it over to you and take that forward, like whatever I didn't or I failed to say, what are the part that you can cover on this particular topic?
So I think if you start with the absurdist literature in its truest form, let's say, well, truest in the sense, like let's take a narrow track here, Shukumara specifically. That the absurdism when I grew up, like growing up, my one of the first things I read in life was Hoja Borola, and I think I'm forever grateful because the next thing I read in, like, the first Bangla I had read was Hoja Borola, the first English I had read was Alice in Wonderland, and I think that the combined impact of that made me feel like while these were told to me as chotoder golpo, as in
Yeah,
children's
it
stories,
isn't really.
I did think it is children's stories because I understood it. I felt like I understood that it resonated with me. Like the ছিল রুমাল হয়ে গেল বেড়াল, হ্যাঁ হতেই পারে, এতে আবার এমন কি আছে? But then probably I remember the first time I came across the concept of a pun was Sri Bakaron Singh.
Ah,
Like BA,
be
Bakaron
back,
Singh BA, কারণ আমি ব্যা। But what I'm trying to say
back,
here is,
Coron,
yes,
back
I do,
করছে তো।
ব্যা। I was like, okay, it's like there's something here, but there was an interesting thing that happened to me at that point in life. And again, I think we need to narrate very subjective experiences here
হুম,
and then see where the intersections are.
হুম,
Um, and one of them was I had this neighbor who insisted that I learn translation. Who insisted with my parents that seems like your kid is able to grasp a language, which is ironic that I did not speak till the age of like 2.5. I was a late bloomer in that sense, and I'm still a late bloomer in pretty much everything in life. Uh, but in that sense,
as in the
that
primary language, you're like,
yeah, like I did not have vocal skills to the point that,
okay,
and even when I spoke, I stammered a lot. Like I
okay,
stammered a lot till like 17, 18.
okay.
But what the translation gave me was I had Alice in Wonderland on the other hand, and I had Hojo Borala on the other. And then, in true Robi Thakur fashion, I was given Hamlet to translate into Bangla. It's like, okay, I think I was 5 years old then. That did not catch my attention, but I went back to Hojo Borolo reading that, and I remember feeling this thing that, okay, I mean, I didn't understand what Hamlet was. Like first 2 pages in, I was like, this is definitely not children's story, but this Hojo Borolo is children's story. I remember reading it back again around the age of 8, 9, um, feeling that, okay, I understand something more now. I had spoken the language for a few more years. Then there was a long gap. I read it back again when I was 16. And I thought, okay, maybe because it was that old, dusted, hardbound book, I'll I open and read and like, hang on, this does not feel like children's story anymore.
Hmm.
This fellow trying to go, like telling the road to Tibet as, what was it? Kolkata Ranaghat? Diamond Harbor, Tibet?
ডায়মন্ড হারবার তিব্বত।
Ha.
হ্যাঁ, মানে as in
Ha, so,
it, so I had some sort of understanding of geography and the way it's
yeah.
going.
And I was like,
Oh?
so what happened? The click that happened there was why?
Mm,
Because there had been the school 10 years of schooling
mm,
that had pushed into me that rationality.
yeah.
Maths, the way it was taught, had taught me logic, And I was like, this is the framework and scientific method,
Methodology.
scientific methodology,
Mm.
all combined together made it feel like an obscure way of looking at things. But then the why quickly became why not.
Mm.
Um, and that is also what connects to Zoidberg, like,
Why not?
uh, yeah. And so I realized that, okay, there is something happening here. And the main thing is, it was no longer a children's story to me, but there was a certain comfort in that absurdity, that when all else fails, and age of 16 was one of the most disastrous periods of my life, academically, family, everything together. And it was a situation in which all else had failed. And the answer to what else was, why not take the long route to Tibet? And kind of, I hang on to it. I was like, okay, the main thing is what? I need to go to Tibet. I'm currently in Ranaghat. I might as well go to Diamond Harbour, then go to Tibet, whether I find Keshodada or not.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and the power of that absurdism there uh, took me, I think, I probably reread. I have never reread Hajabarala. I had never reread Hajabarala till then, and I read it back to back a few times. And each time it felt like there were layers upon layers
Mm.
upon layers
Mm.
of what was happening. That this was not just. I mean, it's like you come to this absurdism with just for the humor. You will get just the humor. You come to it to defy logic. You will get the defying logic. Come to it for fun. You get that. But most of all, to me, it was like, when all else fails, what is that framework that will allow me to still make sense of what was happening around me? In many ways, this is a form of dissociation. Like, absurdism is a form of dissociation
Yeah.
from reality.
Yeah.
And the power of the dissociation is, you have disconnected from the finite rules that you were bound by. And for me, it was also psychological manifestation happening at the same point. And that kind of brought me, and the only way I want to sum that up is, then I went back to Abul Tabul,
Acha.
and the last poem hit me.
Yep. That one, like that one slaps. That one actually is
And
kind of a death
since
note.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. And like, by then I knew of the story, by then I knew of the history of what had happened. And then it hit me that that same mind
Hmm.
is saying this.
This practically on his deathbed.
Yeah.
That's what is like. That's when you actually get the. Like, it hits you in a way. Hang on a moment. All the other parts were same or similar tone or like the frequency have hit me. This guy was not basically laughing from his cheek to cheek or ear to ear, whatever the notion is, but he was trying to make something that is very grim or very bleak and laying it out in front of you at the hope of like. So here's the thing: nonsense is basically when nothing makes sense, how do you make sense of it? You were saying, right, at the end of everything else stops making sense, how do you still reconcile, how do you still keep on going? That's where that nonsense strikes. That's where it tries to, even if null is a data type here, so I will expand on the null part. So that's when it actually happened, occurred to me, like, hang on, not only there's more to it, that part is the more essential part, and the rest of it is basically an act, like passing it along as a children's story or children's book or children's poem, all those things, so that he can publish it in Shondes. But it is so much more for the parent of that child as well as for that child. For me, I was দেখবি তো ওখানে 8 বছর 3 মাস নাকি সামথিং আছে না, তোমার বয়স কত? 8 বছর 3 মাস। I was 8 বছর 3 মাস when first time reading it. It was weirdly, it's like almost somebody sent a time capsule knowing that, hey, this guy, I need to hit him where it, like properly, like this particular what do you call that thing? People pinch needles, right? The Chinese
In
acupuncture.
injection,
Yeah,
acupuncture.
acupuncture. So it's almost like we need to acupuncture this guy at the exact right spot. So we should hand this book over to this guy and make him read this part when he's 8 years 3 months old, and read this part, and then it hits him. And like, if I did not like read those kinds of things, there's some very curious stuff that happens, right? And like at that point, like, is this meant to happen? Is this like some kind of destiny? Like, should I be more concerned, more careful, more focused about exactly what am I kind of felt gratitude after that point onward. Like, hey, most people in at my time, at my age, is not doing this. They're missing out. Don't want to look at it in a very different way. Like, I should be thankful that I can enjoy this. Nothing else. I can read this. I find this funny. I find this enjoyable. Like, I don't need a big meaning or anything else at this point. I just want to find it interesting and entertaining enough, and more like it, essentially. That probably created the bandwidth for which now then I can enjoy Python as comedy. Same or similar, I would say, in a sense, right? We start with something, we end with something. Neither of those things make sense, but overall, it's a social commentary that is objectively funny, and you can project it any different ways you want. All of those ways would be funny, and neither of those would be objected by the author themselves. That was how I was seeing it. I was really bad at.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I just wanted to tie back the thing you said about null, right? So nonsense, then the interpretation of it became not as not sensical, it became beyond sense. And however, the question that comes up then, what is the sense that we are talking of in this context? Is it sensory perception beyond the limits of sensory perception? Is it sense as, going back to our maxims, as commonly accepted social principles as the sense, that anything that is beyond those commonly accepted social practice? And or is it that the sense here is in a way that anything that has meaning, and a forceful breaking down, deconstruction of that meaning? So again, in that sense, beyond sense, that what lies beyond sense. So if I throw language beyond the boundary of common usage, if I try to use language beyond the boundaries of perception, of rationality, of societal understanding, of accepted knowledge, what does language become? And that is where I think the fluidity, that playing with the language comes in, because you have then abstracted the concept of the ability to express anything based on certain parallels. So what were we like in that sense? um, that way of application of language is very similar to how generative AI works, that it's just predicting. It's just taking a set of items,
Yeah,
converting that into a series of other
yeah.
data type that you just
The
can't understand.
hallucinations. The
Yeah.
hallucinations.
And then patch that back.
Mm.
And so I just want to say that what that said, and I think at that was also the point I was learning programming seriously in life. And I realized the importance of null. And I realized how much of a pain the null pointer exceptions were, how much was the undefined behavior that acted. But in all, I think it has still stayed that I still look at null as this concept of a nonsense, like beyond sense, beyond definition. And nothing really cemented that concept in me as strong as Shukumar Rai's writing
Yeah,
has.
yeah. Because in a sense, null is a conscious choice. It's not that something failed. Null is a conscious choice of the developer to keep it that way from everything else. Like, undefined can be a different thing. Zero can be a different thing. When it's null, that means the developer chose it to be null. It doesn't happen like out of the blue. I think one of the ways to put it would be, think of a as in jigsaw puzzle, like lots of pieces, right? The puzzle that hasn't been solved yet, a new thing. Like when you're pushing the boundary, a new lay of the land, you haven't mapped it out yet. So you have a jigsaw puzzle where there are pieces. Nobody knows what the correct order is, right? Now there's a playful entity going ahead and creating Bokotchop or Hashjaru out of that, because nobody knows what the right answer is. The sense has not been laid out yet. Out of all those Bokotchops and Hashjarus, there would be eventually discovery would be made. Hey, this is the one that is a solved puzzle. This is the one that is, out of all those random trials and errors, to some of them are funny, some of them are not funny, this is the one that is for this people who only want the sensical stuff. They would take that and they will run with it, and that would be the part when it'll be like, this part is understood, at which point people like Shukumar Rai would not find that domain funny anymore. They would want to push further down the line, because that part of the map is now known map. Now it has been chalked out or mapped out. So I saw it that way. Anything, or like from a social norm, cultural, like weirdness, to everything else, like even I forgot the particular story where he goes to Hindu Kush Parvatmala, like finding weird kind of animals and stuff. It it critiques or criticizes the, like, people, like the Western explorers going to Africa and their accounts and how they like, it it is telling a story. It is being funny, as well as at the same time it is showing that how absurd does it seem to everybody else. If it falls to a normal person's hand, what does it look like or sound like to them? You cannot say, okay, this author's writing is good and this author's writing is, this is BS. How do you distinguish? How do you like quantify that? Right? You don't know that. So at that point, both of them are true. Both of them are right. You're just assembling the puzzle pieces in different ways. So that's how another way to see the nonsense that I have seen is that not only always it's null, it can also be, how many ways can I break the game? And by doing that, finding out, okay, this one way the game is not broken, this is the way, it is the actual interpretation. Luckily sometimes you end up finding, which is where the success of, and the departure of nonsense, when that happens for any particular small domain or subset of like case, that's when nonsense exits that, like, no longer my territory. Sense have been found here. Now I need to push the boundary through. Anyways, I think so I've been so do you have anything else? Otherwise I was going to talk about, so I posted one thing in chat. Did you see that channel called Abong? You are muted, so I cannot hear what you're saying.
I thought that was a link for this stream.
No. So I was trying to go like start the stream, but it was asking me for, because it's a new channel, it was asking me for authentication and like enabling streaming, etc., all those things. So I had to go back to the like other channel where you already stream there. So it's being streamed there. For the time being, I'm like, I know that we probably can do a better job at exactly consolidating all those things, but I think still possible to be done.
But is this the URL where it is, like the channel in which this is streaming now?
No. I
No.
cannot, like,
Okay.
YouTube won't
Okay.
allow me without, like, you have to
Okay.
give the mobile
That's
phone
fine.
number. It takes 24 hours to set up all those things. I was not sure, it was not there before they started it new. So I started, like, I tried to stream there and it said that no, can do today. So you said that it would be better if we record, so at least the new, like, the stream is being recorded, so that's that. But that channel would be the one where I'm thinking of publishing, starting with abol tabol, like the আবৃত্তি, তো মৌ আবৃত্তি করছে কিছু, আমি করছি কিছু, তো that seemed like the lowest hanging fruit. um Going forward we'll keep on adding more stuff. It's not really only Shukumar Rai or anything. The idea is Bengali literature has not found as much online exposure in this kind of media, or maybe I just want to see how much exposure, or like whether this kind of exposures actually work or not. কিছু আছে বাচ্চাদের আবৃত্তি বলে, I don't want that for kids part. I don't want to make it for kids. I want to make it for adults, for people like the post teenage and then some. So the people who are trying to now like rediscover themselves, like for them to grab onto content that are not only somebody else's language content but their own language content, which it has a rich history, why not use that? So that way, but along with that, so all those things will be like ebong Satyajit, ebong Sukumar, ebong Robi Thakur, ebong Adda. So I was thinking of like if we can make this our this thing more generic, general purpose, and just post it as like ebong Adda, or maybe we can use a different branding. Ebong Adda sounds right to me, like as in okay to me. It's like a huge spectrum, like it can go anywhere pretty much. We're open to discuss pretty much anything. So, and then maybe have guests, maybe not have guests, maybe we just go on about it, whatever we want to discuss anyway, and have that as a repository for that, that we can round back to. That is as a live stream. Sounds good?
Yep.
All right. Any changes that you'd want to make as in as a concept wise?
Not really. Um, but something that occurred to me, just to like bring up in this context, right? That we are talking of Shotajitra in the context of that Chotoder Golpo, children's literature. And the one thing I have always felt, and I guess a lot of people feel but then forget as they grow old, is this contempt for grown-ups, that why does there need to be a separate children's edition which is jingly, colorful, bright,
Yeah.
and then shit gets grim as you grow older. I was the kid who liked less colors, brighter colors bothered me. So I was like, am I already a grown-up because I like those grim themed thing? But the one thing about Shukumara's work, and in that sense, I guess it's also shaped how I see, the human consciousness. In that sense, is the child stage is just a vastly fast learning version of the same self. It's almost like the rate of learning peaks and then slowly grades down, and there are psychological uh, analysis to back that up. But I'm saying the literature, or even the the way you deal with children. One of my gripe always has been how people do baba bacha to kids, and I never do that. To me, that's an individual. To me, or whether part
Exactly.
of a collective or not,
Yeah.
but that person deserves a certain amount of respect, because who am I to suddenly think that I know better than this person, that I have certain new, I know everything that this mind can think of, and most of the time it turns out not.
Hmm.
Because again, a young mind is more capable of thinking in nonsensical
Yeah.
terms because it has got lesser amount of sense to unlearn to get
Yeah.
there. So the ability for an author, or to for somebody to maintain that level. I mean, yeah, I understand that there are certain things that can be hazardous, that in case somebody has not learned something, but it's I think of it at the same way as a civilization's progress. That would you go and give warp technology to somebody who's just invented metals? And the answer is yes, you can. But
The mishaps, the probability of mishaps go like proportionally higher.
yeah, but then there is that same infantilizing in our narrative of history, especially of anthropology. When we look back at the Bronze Age, at least the way we were, at least the way I was taught in school, it was as if they were infantile humans. And slowly we became adolescent humans. Now we are grown up humans. So if I was born at that
সেই
age, I
ধৃষ্টতা,
would have,
the ধৃষ্টতা, the consider right now we
yeah,
are the best. I mean, like,
we are the best.
we are the best.
Okay.
We are done developing. We are done growing up, right? That
Yeah.
is the part that gets me, and it makes me really mad. Like,
Yeah.
I'm with you so far. Like, oh, right, so okay, we were very underdeveloped and all these things. Like, but to consider that now we got this, and now there is no fun. That is the part where, to ground back to your point, what you're saying is that the crystallization of self or identity, or even the concept of like reality itself, the crystallization is what growing up traditionally has been. Growing up is nothing else than the crystallization, to lack the fluidity. So the reason we are a little bit mad about the whole thing is because we have retained that neoteny of that flexibility, that fluidity among ourselves, within ourselves, and we prefer to keep it that way, which is why, like, it was not beaten out of us in the right amount of time. We kind of have been able to retain that during that period, so which is why now we have more stronger will to continue that, because we can see the benefit of it. Think of the, like, the alternative timeline where it has been during the school age, it has been beaten out of us, and we don't even know what we are missing out. That neoteny, our identity is strong, and we're like, no, this is the best we can ever be, there is nothing else to learn. Everyone else who says anything else about what doesn't match with our understanding, they're just plain wrong, and they should be like put in jail or something like that. Anyways, point here is, that's exactly what death of a childhood is. To me, childhood is not just one individual or identity that should be respected. It's the concept of childhood itself should be respected the same way, and like retained as much as possible, because once you lose that, you fail to see what you're missing out, right? So I'll hop, like, give it back to you for the part that you are saying, that why you think that children's books, the separation of that, you're not okay with that. Please continue on that part. Like, I don't think you finished that part. Maybe you did.
I mean, I had finished that, but the thing I was trying to point out is this concept of linear evolution, and the concept of linear evolution being applied to human history, being applied to education, being applied to the growth of an individual within a society, being applied to a career progression everywhere. It's that linear time is easier to understand. It's easier to understand ki in the past we were conquered and now we are free. Like, yeah, in the past we were conquered by various invasive forces. Cool. Right now we are free. Well, um, but then on the other hand, the specific part about children's literature that really bothers me is it assumes a certain level, a certain step after step of learning, that as if somebody is going to learn these concepts about, even let's say, what is a biological sex, what is gender, what, how do you actually reproduce, to how do you then build a society, how does this like, who's to say in what order somebody is able to understand that. And uh, for example, as a uh, child growing up, I found that I understood maths faster than I understood literature, but I was not allowed access to higher order mathematics, which means at in class 4 I was solving the maths books of my cousins who were in class 10, and they thought I was showing off. At the same time, I could not give a literary analysis like নামকরণ সার্থকতা, like কি জানি বাবা যে লিখেছে নাম দিয়েছে, তাকে জিজ্ঞেস করো আমায় কেন জিজ্ঞেস করছো? Uh,
One of the most
like,
stupidest questions. Like, I was really good at bullshitting, so I was
yeah,
good
yeah,
at those kind of questions. Like, yeah, bring that. Like, do you know the right answer? Like, has the like, did the author talk? If they haven't spoken anything about this, so whatever I say, you cannot say no,
yeah.
right? So
So
I'm free to
uh,
BS. So
I mean, what I'm trying to say is that, see,
yeah, but I understand
um,
what you're saying.
a
Yeah.
lot of push in educational reform today is also around bringing a more inclusive education to uh, the current generation. And I'm talking of outside the mainstream education. And my partner works in that. A bunch of people I know work in that area. And one of the common themes I keep on hearing is empower the learner. Let the learner create their own curriculum, where the educator is simply the
Facilitator.
the safeguard as
Mm,
well as the facilitator,
mm,
the safeguard for the boundary.
mm.
So basically, the a very strong prime directive in the Star Trek Prime Directive in the form of non-interference needs to apply for
Yeah.
the healthy growth of an individual. And uh, from that part, what I want to say is that anything that I think we say, the issue with censorship is that it, again, I'm probably starting to sound like Zizek at this point. But yeah, praise be Zizek. What I'm trying to say is that the censorship really is this higher moral ground of this holier than thou attitude that I know what is better for you in exactly this order. Till you cross that threshold, you are not allowed to experiment with this. But suddenly, after that, you must. Like, suddenly, after the age of 18, you must vote. In one day, you need to understand what is politics, who is the right candidate to choose. You're not allowed to drive till 16 or 18, depending on where you are. But
17,
suddenly,
17 years, 360 days.
yes. And that's like what this cuts across is in my work, I do not distinguish based on the age. I always distinguish based on, it's like the prerequisites can be almost said in form of a software dependency. Do you have this and this? That is what you need in order to run this, because that's sort of the library I'm drawing from. Unless you know that, you won't be able to understand, which is again a knowledge graph.
This is one of the most important or interesting topics to me. Like, there is only a handful of few topics that I am like very much invested, like I want to do something about it, to the point. Like, there are things that I know that this is important, somebody should do something about. This is one of the topics, like the education system, like reformation of education system. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I know enough of those things that seem absurd, and there needs to be, like, there are easier solutions there than the ones that are being employed. So I know that part, and what I am pining for essentially is people with similar kind of mentality. And there's another challenge there, is that handling a child is ethical concern. Like, you, whose child are you giving those values, and how they're turning out to be, it basically becomes your responsibility. And even though you're very sure that what you're doing is a bona fide, like your good faith basis, you're doing, try to do the right thing or best thing that you think can do, but truth is a shared understanding. If everybody says that's wrong, then you're wrong. You will be tried for malpractice. So, how do we change that lay of the land? So, before we get to actually, like, giving curriculum to kids or facilitating that, a lot of groundwork needs to happen to make that a norm. Like, this is alternative mechanism as a norm, and some bold parents to actually stand up and to do that, like to contribute to that, and show that as like, hey, see, this is the results that we are getting out of these practices, which will take another generation or something in order to start, like, best case scenario. But it has to start there. It has to start somewhere. uh, I just don't know how exactly Like that's the reason I probably should not slack off on like meeting Sharon or like speaking to her about these topics. I think I should prioritize that. But yeah,
In
it's too
fact,
many
she's gone
things.
to Bangalore for a related. She's doing a course which is in uh, related educational field, and this is like a field study trip. But uh, the one thing I just want to point out here, see, um, the good news is that a lot of work has happened already, and there is substantial ground for this to be considered a viable alternate. I mean, even if you like want to demean that and call it alternative, uh, what I mean by demeaning is it's like saying that the mainstream is still the truth and these are all truths.
Yeah.
Um, but there is a fundamental difference, and I see a very strong parallel in software engineering to it. And I keep on drawing this line. So again, if any of them seem too far fetched, feel free to stop me. Is a big focus of this kind of education system where you are empowering the learner. One is you don't necessarily, your only criteria rather is not the learner's age. Your criteria is the learner's abilities and lack of abilities. Based on that, a lot of effort, the education is geared towards helping the learner build the curriculum, a sort of service discovery that in the software design paradigms, do you design services which explicitly know each other? Or do you build a system that acts as service discovery? And then you plug in the different services, let the services discover each other based on the common thing. So they're doing something very similar in education, that they are putting a lot of effort into helping the child learn, let curiosity lead the way, being one of the foundational principles, with the facilitator guiding across. And again, I'm not the expert here. I am giving you an external perspective into what I have observed. Um, but what this boils down to is this fact that you are not starting with a fixed curriculum. You have a certain set of milestones you would like to achieve, and the progression of everyone would not be the same. So then a standard evaluation technique does not apply anymore. Your evaluation grows more towards a research oriented. So then kids don't give exams. Kids write research papers. They choose a topic. They want to build something. You fix some aspects, just like in service definition, you fix that, okay, this is the service discovery URL, this is the protocol it speaks. That part needs to be fixed. So there is a lot of protocol design work that is happening in this sector right now, and a lot of new organizations are coming up. In fact, specifically, if you've heard of Teach for India, the one thing I know through Sharon, the founders of Teach for India have started something called the Circle Incubation, the Circle India something. And what they are doing is acting as an incubator in the very way that we are familiar with in the startup world, of incubating, startups, except they are incubating educators of the next generation. They're incubating people who are building alternate education principles. And this is happening in India. And the beauty is that there is a lot more scope within India to do this because of the variety, because of the diversity, because you can't just speak one language, you can't enforce one framework, but you have to build the discovery oriented learning and a research oriented evaluation into things, uh, which is again not new. In our academic curriculum, we reach that only in like masters or postgrad or in PhD, where suddenly, I mean, I was made to believe that PhD is this very difficult thing because you have to research. You don't get a textbook that you mug up and go and write. You have to find what you want to learn, then you have to try to find how you can learn, then you have to learn that and prove that you have learned it. Everything is on you. So, it's not that these things did not exist, but the point is, we break the age barrier, break the learner's basic, like the role of the teacher changes to being that Adi Guru version to, like, if there was such an Adi Guru, then that Adi Guru would be an encyclopedia that would also guide you. And finally, the one trajectory, the other trajectory that I find very curious. I've been rewatching, I've been watching the original Star Trek, gritting through the sexist metaphors, the racial metaphors that exist, but trying to look at what was being done, trying to look at it in the context of 1962 through 67 or 69, what it was, that what was really going on, that it has to be compared at par with what was
Hmm.
and the new things that it says, and some things still fall in place, which you see TNG kind of trying to rectify. One of those things, I mean, Prime Directive is probably mentioned somewhere in season two, late in season two. Till then, it was called the non-interference directive, and the
I
directive
forgot,
is
but yeah,
the Prime Directive is simply that a higher order civilization should not influence or contaminate
development of
a low development of a lower order civilization, and the non-interference to be practiced as the prime goal. And I think that prime directive applies very strongly to education, to the way we run our political systems, to the way we run our any, like, even at a family level, that where does that leave you? Because the prime directive also has scopes where you would override it, where you see constantly Jean-Luc Picard throws prime directive to the air every now and then, that they are overriding their judgment. So that is kind of a facilitator stepping in and saying that, okay, you might have said non-interference, but this is not safe. There is also a judgment call. But just tying that together, the education aspect of things also need to be treated from the perspective of a discovery and the ability to explore what is beyond the sensical world that the learner knows already, because what else are you exposing them to otherwise? But I think what's interesting to what I don't have is an experiment in progress, which you have.
yeah.
Like that you said, the bringing up a child as the ethical dilemma, that at which point do you throw that in?
Yeah.
What do you balance? And I think that's another perspective that I'm interested in.
So that's another topic I was not thinking that we can discuss today, but I'm happy to discuss that. So I actually had a couple of hypotheses in my mind. One of the things that you said, that you learn to like speak later in your life, as in like two and a half, two and a half. So what I found is that okay, this discussion is a bit longer or like a larger context. Let me establish the context, right? So yeah, so I was never convinced that intellect is the, the like from alpha to omega of what people's capabilities are. There needs to be, there are more things to it than what IQ measures. What are those things, and is there a comprehensive, like like can you map it out, can you chalk it out? What are those things that one mind can handle, you are employing your neurons to do, and sometimes your neurons can decide, I am not good at this, or I don't want to be good at this, I want to be good at this other thing, right? So it always struck me as a choice, and have seen that most of the time people would choose some or the other at the cost of some other things. People who are really good at reasoning, problem solving, like the visual, or ordering of stuff, those are the traditional IQs. They would also have, most of the time they would not have too many other things, but sometimes they would be a good linguists as well. If they're good linguist as well as good, like higher IQ, they might even be in an autistic spectrum where they have really poor social interactions and stuff. Good at language, but poor at communicating. There are people who are good at communicating, would stand up there on stage and speak very well, but then small talks will get completely fumbled. There are, so what I'm trying to say is that there are lots of different aspects to it. All those things are basically your brain deciding, I want to reshape myself in a way this XYZ becomes my first path, and those other things I am not really interested so much about it. The moment your brain decides that, it will start reshaping itself in that manner, to the point it will re-optimize itself over and over and over, to the point I am bad at maths. Nobody start at being bad at maths. Somebody at childhood deciding that I want to use those neurons differently, eventually finding that I can't really use those neurons anymore. They help me read somebody's facial expression better and understand whether they're in pain, are they hiding something, etc. So those kind of things. So I'm just like, it's not the exact 1:1 relationship. What I'm trying to say is that we brain is a very highly flexible machine, like computer, and we can decide whether to crypto mine with it or get more frames on a video game. You can choose. You cannot do both at the same time. You get to choose. Now that was the hypothesis, which was fueled by, like, I got more fuel on that hypothesis while Rai was born, like around that time. So there is a thing called cognitive trade-off hypothesis. I think I talked about this a little bit. So some chimps can identify, like they have very highly visual persistence. So if you show for a 1/10 of a second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on the screen, and then you wrap them up with just dots, and they understand the concept of, over the time of practice, they know which one is like the order, like 1, then 2, then 3. They will just go and touch screen, go through all those things. After that, like near perfection, like not near perfection, like I haven't seen them do that mistake, make that mistake, right? They do that very well. The So humans can't. Like, you will have to be like, if I show you 10 numbers on a screen, random places, for 10 seconds, and then wrap it up with white markers, then you probably will be able to find like up to 5 or 6 or 7 after you will not. So, and it's not your shortcoming. The point that they're trying to make is that we abstract too hard in our brain. It does not make sense for us to have that consolidated static information like that and recognize that as is. But we have had that ability. We chose to drop it. We're trading it off for higher level of abstraction. So when you're trying to communicate somebody, there were 10 dogs chasing me, like half a kilometer behind. I need your help. You're trying to communicate that information. The exact positions of those dogs are not really as important anymore. What is more important, how do I very succinctly transfer that information to you, so that now you get to help me and we can together drive off those dogs. But if I was solo, I would have benefit of knowing exactly how many of those are right under my, behind me, how many of them are like, so those information, the critical bit of like crystallized details are not really important anymore. What I'm trying to say is that, in a roundabout way, is that we create more and more higher level of abstraction, and by doing so we trade off our superhuman traits. Like, if somebody can do those number clicking as fast, we'll call that person superhuman ability. Some people do that, like the savantism. Some people who are autistic but has savant like abilities can tell you exactly 1969 to 2nd April which weekday was it. Those people are hyper utilizing their part of the brain to do just that, whereas trading off something else, maybe their social life is struggling or suffering, or maybe so autism spectrum has so my point was, can I uh, create a situation where it seems like autism, and does that allow bandwidth for something else? So I intentionally, I don't know whether you have seen that. So when she was 6 plus, like, so no, sorry, almost 8, I She was starting to speak. I took that she can take instruction, ta 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 da da da, like whatever I'm saying, that she's saying back. So I took a video of that recording as a proof that she can speak and she can follow the instruction. Like if I am asking her to say some specific thing, she will say that. But then I completely cut her off from like vocalizing things like learning language. I completely cut her off from that. What happened is that, so my idea was, most people, when if we are trying to learn language, we're basically, so visual processing, language processing, those two things take up huge amount of processing power of our brain, right? And if we ground up at the very childhood, we overburden ourselves with those things. I cannot tie her eyes, but if I can make sure that the need for language is reduced, then how else does it manifest? Because it's a very flexible machine. It will find out other things to process if you don't give something to process. So turns out she is good problem solver and conscientious, all those things, as well as something that is completely oddball opposite end of them. She's also very good empath. And those two things happen, she would not be able to explain how or why or what, but she will know somebody needs coming down. Like she is better than both me and her mother combined on that aspect, and has been since as long as we can remember, pretty much. uh, when she understands human better, she understands problem solution, those things better. And the cost that we needed to pay is that up till 3 years old she didn't speak in complete full sentences anymore any longer. After that we like, okay, now your time to get back on up to on track. Now she understands only one language well enough to form proper sentences, that is English. She uses English, like writing and reading and like speaking, all those things. আর নর্মালি বাংলিশে কথা বলে, বাংলা এখনো ধরে উঠতে পারে, বাংলা ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ লাইক probably will expose her to that eventually. The point is, you need to sacrifice something in order to get understanding of other things. This was an experiment. Now I don't want to subject this experiment somebody else's kids to this, right? But I wanted to take that risk and see exactly how does that manifest. Probably someday she will blame me for the way it turns out. There will be always, everything has a good side and a bad side, right? So probably she will find out a reason to be mad at me. But I'm not too mad at myself for trying this out or figuring that part out. She's still like, I'm still running things. I hopefully none of those things like would put her in a massive disadvantage in her life. But yeah, that's pretty much where I draw the boundary. Like, would I? Is it something that can be compensated after? So that's how it has been so far. She, yeah, go ahead. If you have something, questions or anything.
Just some parallel observations, but that can wait.
Okay. So I like, so the entire ethical dilemma, I understand that. I don't know how else to put it, and I don't know how else to, like, I can let it go. I can not run an experiment. Nobody would be better for it. So I don't know whether there's a one good answer there. With that said, it does seem like if you can delay your language processing as well as visual processing, uh, and I did work on that as well. Visual processing is not like tying up your eyes, but the number of abstraction layers on visual processing, like D and B, the mirror ring, identifying them as different. If you can delay those kind of abstractions as well, you actually have more bandwidth to process, like learn other things faster. You will eventually like learn that as well. But what will happen is that more core neurons would be involved into like forming the baseline of the realities, like the baseline principles itself, than just remembering solid facts, which is what ends up happening. And once that ends up happening, like uh, so what I mean by the core neurons, so you see the hippocampus, like a midbrain part, right? So okay, how do I go on about it? This is a much longer discussion. Okay, so if you consider in a very short form, like there are three parts to our brain: the reptile brain, the mammalian brain, and the Homo sapiens brain, like the wrinkly part, the neocortex and stuff. So the reptile brain, that part understands pain and fear, disgust. Those, sorry, not disgust. Pain and fear, and pleasure and like what's the opposite of pain? Sorry, that's pleasure. And what's the opposite of fear? I forgot. But anyways,
Courage.
uh,
Courage.
mm,
I mean, it's like
the
an
drive, the
absence of.
drive, the drive. Yeah,
Yeah.
the drive essentially. So that part is essentially most of it is, and the body functions like running heart at the right pace, etc., breathing at the right, those things are happening from that small brain side of things, right? The midbrain is the one that the hippocampus and the, how do I show this, like somewhere around this, like if you cross that through, or maybe look up hippocampus, the shape of it, we end up using it as a memory storage. But it's not really a memory storage. It is actually the map reduce section of the brain. So you can use it in a multiple different ways. Anything that goes, you can put it as like map and reduce, the actual, the programmatic like way of doing it. Hippocampus will do that for you. So you can not only remember facts, you can also remember methodologies itself or concepts itself. So when we say um, why somebody is really good at a factory worker, right? A factory worker, what would be their skill? Their, that hippocampus would be really good at doing that one thing over and over, the particular move they're making to make more of the one thing that they can do. And it will figure out a way to release dopamine and endorphin for doing that. It will figure out to seek pleasure out of doing that thing over and over. But for some people, that would not be the case. For them, they would figure out, I see. So if I have these many people in this particular section of the factory, that is just barely optimal amount of people that I need for that. So if I put some of those people that are not really into it, they're causing more problems, but put them into the like overseer role, that might actually overall improve my output, because now they are not troublemakers. They are now like, so what will end up happening, that guy will end up becoming the manager or the people who run the company or run the factory, those kind of ways, right? That's what kind of ends up happening. People who see more concepts and stuff, how do you map reduce and put them? Some people, London taxi drivers, for them it's the spatial geospatial location itself is the thing that they need to store. So all those things actually basically are going into that hippocampus, right? The reason I'm trying to say this is that memory, you can trade off on memory as well. If you don't want to, so hippocampus is like the processor of your computer in a sense that it can have higher resolution but lower number of and lower frequency of data. So your brainwave, that's the reason memory consolidation happen when you're sleeping, is because it's actually running the neurons through the exact set of dance that will happen in order to recall that memory back. So brainwaves are basically the clock signals for your brain. They're happening all the time. And if you want to recall something, you're basically training your brain a particular set of dance to recall that information back. While you're sleeping, your hippocampus and the midbrain part of things, they're basically consolidating that dance to associate with something. Doesn't mean the older things are lost. It's basically you're overwriting sometimes, which is why sometimes in a dissociative state you can find out memories that you didn't think even existed anymore, right? So anyways, whereas the front this part of the brain is better at lower resolution but high frequency, like the systolic array, kind of like basically the tensor processors, right? uh, like GPUs or tensor processors, it's doing more processing, but it does not have the the precision level is basically like 8-bit, not 32-bit, not 64-bit. Whereas the internal part that is 64-bit, which brings me back to the initial topic that I was trying to say, is that if you end up using those high precision neurons for just about remembering location data, just about remembering old memories, etc., then they're being spent, like they're being spent for something that's not the highest potential that you can use them for. Now, it is not that easy to either reshape or repurpose those memories. You actually actively have to start forgetting things in order to train them or bring them up. Like, I don't need to remember the consolate like solid details. I just need to know the level of abstractions that goes on top of it, and what's the fundamental theory that holds all of those together. If you can now remember that, you can put more of those things, and it creates the fundamental layer that way. If a child from the childhood, if somebody starts doing that, and if that becomes the optimization factor, by the way, it is insane how well you can teach your own brain to seek pleasure in doing something that it decided that it's pleasurable. Like, it decided it's pleasurable, now it will decide, when that happens, I need to release endorphin to dopamine to seek it, and endorphin when that happens. If that happens, then anything in the world can be pleasurable task to you. So for somebody who finds um, interest in doing maths as a class 4 student of like a higher education, there's nothing holding you back. You can basically at that point you're becoming a math machine. Like, if you have the right uh, books and basically the pointers in front of you, you can start breaking grounds. Usually, that's where the blocker comes in. Usually, you're not allowed to. Usually, there's no like preset ways to go on about it. Most people do not even try. We want to be a more rounded person, people. I don't see the problem all. The point is, if we start recognizing those factors and allow people who are like, who already have figured out, most of the times what we're talking about, like allowing kids to build their own curriculum, allowing, like, letting them figure out what they're interested about, etc. Sometimes kids do find that out. Somebody wants to draw, somebody wants to do math, somebody wants to translate books, whatever. I don't know, like, that's not the point. The point is, if somebody has that interest, utilize that as the driving factor. In fact, you can use that as something, as a treat. Hey, I want to create you a more rounded person anyway, so you have to do the other thing as well. But if you do this, you know what, at evening you get to do more maths. Like, I'll give you a class 11's book. Now it's a win-win condition in both ways. We are really bad at, like, traditional academic, like, entire schooling mechanism is really 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 bad at doing just that. In fact, it works the opposite way. It does not allow the learner to decide what they want to learn, like, at all. Yeah, sorry, rant over.
No, it wasn't a rant. It was beautiful. In fact, like what I meant when you said I showed this, I was like, that's the amount of time I have, so you can continue.
Okay.
Um, uh, and again, I mean, this is what happens when we discuss. So, talking of that endorphin and thing is like, right now, my brain has always identified that discussions with you are pleasurable. So, it tries to optimize for that situation. When that happens, I went into this discussion today and feeling low because I will be alone. I knew that once I step into it, it's going to work out. I
Yeah.
sat with trying to write the topics, trying to do some pre-work. It's like, it's okay, we'll figure out. So that's like the brain saying that do not give up on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the risk of validating everything you said so far, especially in the context of Rai, um, if you, I mean, I'd like to go into a few things here, mostly relating to my experience around this. Do you
Hmm.
think we can afford to have the
Sure, sure.
time?
I have time.
Yeah. So, um, I had a very peculiar childhood in that sense. Um, it was a very big mixed bag, except I did not have this, I did not have parents who looked at bringing somebody up in this way. So a lot of these are take a shekha for me. But that take a shekha, like when I look back, I realized that okay, these are the boundaries where they did not need to be strict. The areas where they were strict, the areas where I was not allowed to do certain things, that just these factors moved around. So, when I said that I learned to speak late, I don't remember I having a problem with that. I remember everybody else around me having a problem with that. But so what I'm trying to say is that me growing up, I was this utterly confused kid because conflicting expectations from parents, from neighbors, from school, and certain places where I did well, from there, excessive expectation. So they were all blurred up. But if I have to go back and redo, I would want to redo it in exactly the same way that you talked of. Like, I would rather that my parents knew this, you know? So that's what I meant, that at the risk of validating you, if I was the child, the pain of my childhood that I carry on, I see myself feeling calm about the process that you talked of bringing up, right? And that is what I meant by the risk of validating you. Because if I felt physically calm, if I were to place myself in that situation, um, and feel that, okay, I don't see a friction because I did trade offs. And that is where I wanted to come to, that I did trade offs. And one of my earliest trade offs was, I guess, we keep on coming back to maxims. One of my earliest maxims in life was it's okay to forget. It's never okay to stop thinking, to stop analyzing. And
So true.
yeah,
100%. 100%. I'd rather
and
forget and recalculate. It's the
so
same
I
thing.
was that kid who would finish exercise copies after exercise copies of maths at a certain point, like the age of, I think class 2 to 5 ish. Something happened after class 5. I'll tell you that later. Uh, but the 2 to 5, I finished exercise book after exercise book, and I never remembered where I kept them because I did not need them, because I was never going to look back at them. What was important is at that moment, I had solved something.
I can solve it even if
I
like
can
next
solve
time,
it.
another time, another 5 times it comes, I can solve it. Like with a
Yeah,
high amount of certainty. That's what matters. Like why do we have to remember anyway in that case?
yeah.
Right.
And my favorite kind of maths were proving the formulas. um, like where I was like, okay, this is how people had come to this formula, especially in algebra that we were taught at that point, the classic Casey-Nag texts. Uh, and like, okay, this is what is happening. And just going back at it, it was almost like rereading a story, seeing the characters form, even though you know what happens in the end. The formula for me was like knowing what happens at the end of the story, but I will read it, that story anyway. Which is also why I keep on maintaining till date that I am never bothered by spoilers. I am never bothered by spoilers because I know there is a certain end state that you're building up to, certain formula, so to say, the summarized, theorized, compressed version of what there can be. Now, very interestingly, that maxim that okay, it's okay to forget has been one of the most conflicting things in my life growing up because everybody around me had the exact opposite view. So I criminalized myself. I went into, so this is where the conflicts in personality kind of emerge, that I was constantly trying to be that boy that everybody else wanted me to be. Whereas behind the scenes, I was always forgetting things. So, what did I cope with? How did I cope with that? I built knowledge systems. I was like, guess what? I can forget, but I can write down my notes in a way that I can get back to that. And of course, Einstein's that famous story, whether true or not, validated it that my driver, like Einstein's driver saying that even my driver can answer that I don't need to remember facts. I used to think that it's a great big thing, but it's that in truth, I could never come out to anybody and say that I forget. It was not acceptable.
I this like this saddens me. Like this makes me really sad because not only that this is the case for one kid where this has happened. This is happening at a large scale, at a mass scale. And
Yeah,
lot of those
yeah,
people, lot of those kids would would be so broken that they would not even be able to recall it the way that you are doing. They will be that far broken. They
yeah.
would not even
So
have the system
then
in the first place, right?
it's that maxim evolved to it's okay to forget. It's never okay to stop thinking and analyzing, but it's critically important to remember certain things so as not to repeat the same things again.
I,
When that happened, that was the knowledge base forming part. And I have a very interesting. Again,
Max,
this
by the
is
way, before that, maxims are the opposite spectrum of memory itself, like the solid memory that I
it
was
is
talking
it
about.
is
So
it
when
is.
once you start remembering the maxims, that's when you don't want to remember the details.
But yeah, you know. So again, which is why I cannot back these up with specific instances always. In very rare cases, I can give a specific anecdote, but in mostly this is the reason I speak vague. And I have had partners, I have had friends who have told me that everything you say seems like a lie, seems made up. And it is made up.
That's the sensor problem.
It's not lie. It
Sensors,
is made
yeah,
up.
yeah, sensors want solid proof with receipt to show up. The problem is that the world has enough resolution that you can never capture it to the highest amount of
Yeah.
fullest resolution. You don't have enough memory for it. Nobody does. So if by trying to remember things you're subjecting yourself to a shallow view of the world or reality, or only a part that you can bring or keep the receipts of. Whereas if you start building the maxims, you can apply the principles like exactly the way you can apply operators on particular kind of equations. A gamma function, how a gamma function is solved. You can say that if I can do it this way, I can just say that okay, this is just half t and you're solved. Like I don't have to do it all over again. I don't have to show the steps. If you do this, the concept boils down to this. And that concept is when, but it makes a lot of people very, very uncomfortable, uneasy, the ones who are good at and have learned in that system to remember solid details with the receipts. I have not found a solution to this problem. The only solution that I can think of is just you need to, not you need to, even I need to, like reduce that exposure because that that interaction does not go well. There's
I
no.
was coming to that. I was coming to that. In many a sense, I feel like I'm 5 years old. So I'm pretty much in some sense like because of the amount of learning and then the unlearning and then coping with and then suddenly hitting this zen, a certain level of clarity where the moment it gets back to that, it's okay to forget has a very tragic aspect in relationships because I would then evaluate relationships under the same uh, parameters. And I'm not just talking of romantic relationships. I'm talking of any casual friendship. I'm talking of hooking up with somebody. I'm talking of a teacher. I'm talking of a manager. And I have till date never worked with a manager, and never worked nicely with a manager who insisted that I remembered things. I worked very well with managers who have been probably two, uh, who allowed me the space to think, and even if I have approached something previously, go over it again. But anyway, I was trying to talk of something very specific, and I think it's like finally in life I have that clarity of I feel like that is past. So right now, even though it saddens, it is a past thing because I feel like I have understood how can I not fall into that trap again. So sort of becoming your own parent of
Yeah.
sorts,
Yeah.
allowing building that space. And one of the fundamental aspects of it is reducing exposure. It is choosing very, and I always used to think that why am I bad at socializing? Because I always say everybody's supposed to be good at socializing. When I went into the concept of networking, I'm like, why the hell am I bad at networking? And then before you know it, I have a bunch of people I'm collaborating with. And hang on, where did this come from? So a lot of that analysis has come together in this very cute childhood memory of my parents insisting that I learn to paint. As every Bengali kid, you have a drawing teacher, right? I had a drawing teacher. Looking back, I realized that was the only queer, non-gender affirming person in the area that I was allowed contact with. And I was shit at drawing.
But
I
still,
was
you
shit.
enjoyed going there and
I
communicating with the
enjoyed
person.
going there
Yeah.
because that person never critiqued ki ei গাছটা exactly এরকম কেন হয়নি. My
Yeah.
trees looked like lollipops.
Hang on a second. I, I might actually have just the thing. Okay, okay. Go on, go on. It will take me a while to find it
So
out.
there was something happening. They were like, my parents were very upset with that teacher. কি তুমি তো কিছুই শেখাতে পারো না, ছেলে কি করছে, এসব কি আঁকছে. Uh, I go to drawing competition. I think I had told you this is one of my favorite anecdotes. I draw a mango. Okay, I'm like 4 5 years old. মাঠে বসে পুরো শিশু সম্মেলনী হচ্ছে, আহ, সেখানে আমি আঁকছি। 0.5 ঘন্টা ধরে আঁকলাম। আঁকবার পর জিনিসটা কিরকম, মানে আমি লাইক, দিস ইজ কনসেপচুয়ালি আ ম্যাঙ্গো। সো হোয়াট ডাজ ওয়ান ডু? The brilliant mind in me labeled it MANGO. Just in case you don't know, this is a mango.
Yep.
So what happened, like what happened as a result of that was I realized that why I liked going, like this is looking back of course, that why I liked the drawing class while I was in there was I am a terribly visual thinker, but my visual concepts don't align with the real world. They are at best gross approximations because, unless very important, I do not care about the finer details. Because to me, it seems that the lollipop is sufficiently a tree to me. It can convey the treeness
Yeah.
of a concept.
The form of a tree. And in fact, that's not like the entire concept of stick
Yeah,
figure. People who do not enjoy stick figure comics. I
yeah, and that's why when I hit,
yeah,
so two things, right? When I hit flowchart, computing books, I'm like, these people don't know how to draw, but they're drawing everything. And they're like, this means decision, this means storage. I'm like, no storage looks like this, right? Tell me where a storage looks like this, right? And
exactly.
where does the decision do this? And then I realized, oh, they just mean এইটার এই দিক থেকে এখানে, এই দিক থেকে এখানে, এই দিক থেকে এখানে.
That's the
আচ্ছা,
utility of it. That's the
that's
utility
the
of it.
utility of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, Acha, this is how I was drawing all along. So let me just draw. And since then, I think in flowcharts. I conceptualize using flowcharts. And I draw the most weirdest drawings, but they still convey enough
I mean,
information to me.
I think so. There are two things that you're saying, right?
but
In
but
my yeah.
why, what I'm trying to connect back to is I chose that lack of granularity
Hmm.
at a very early age over choosing for the abstraction, deciding to like focus at an abstract level. But also in many ways it's like going at warp speed. Like I chose my destination was kind of far.
Hmm.
So my option was be on impulse drive, reach there in 200 years, observe everything that is
There.
in the path,
Yeah.
or go there at warp speed, at which point the stars are just zooming past, but the zooming past of stars, that field itself is such a brilliant view to me.
So very recently, I had to convince somebody of a particular analogy about this particular, as in the trade-off, how you make it. The person was asking the question. The guy is super smart, but like that sensory like has to be solid sensory receipt for me to grab onto. Otherwise, I'm at a loss of, like, I cannot go into the nebulous territory, that kind of thing, right? So when I make some predictions, like I'm saying that okay, something like this, like kind of thing is gonna happen. Their problem is like, how can you know? How can you possibly know? There is no way to know that. And my point was that is because you enjoy being in the maze. You enjoy solving the maze as a player playing the maze. What you're not understanding, not realizing, is that when stuck with the exact situation, like when it hits me, I immediately disqualify myself as a player, take myself off like to a bird's eye view, and now that how you possibly know is not a question to me anymore. What did it cost? Everything. I'm not a player anymore. I cannot get the same enjoyment of solving the problem the way you would do, the sense of element of surprise, whether I should go this way or that way. That element of surprise goes out away. But this is not confusing to me anymore. Now I can clearly see. In fact, that's what I am good at. That's exactly what I'm good at. It took me quite a while to explain the concept like this, because if you see that explanation itself is a nebulous concept. I am not physically moving up. I'm just trying to convince the person that hey, there are different ways to look at it. Sometimes communicating that becomes really, really difficult, really, really hard. And the challenge there is over 90% people only wants to see the world that way. The rest to 10% are usually weird, awkward, secluded introverts that would not, like, you have to go and find out to make that friendship. Otherwise, you cannot find them out. Like, they would exist in some shadows, knowing that nobody else is like me, nobody else understands me. But that's what struck me, that hey, the world is run by people who are really, really smart, but they have. So Star Trek had an episode about people who have exactly this kind of. So Shaka, when the towers, like when the walls fell,
Shaka when the walls fell.
right? So if you think about that, what is
That
it?
is till date marked as one of my most favorite Star Trek episodes ever. And on that episode, I have shown that episode to pretty much everybody who I would call close friends or even acquaintances, even dates.
Either
And
they
the
already
response is
understand,
that the
yeah.
response is the elicit, tells leaps and bounds, at least the information that is relevant to me about them. So I kind of use that episode as an acid test.
Yeah,
I was like, let me
yeah,
categorize you, you know?
yeah,
And your
exactly.
response to
Oh, I think, I think, I
like
think that
Temba
was,
his arms wide,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
people laugh. Those who are laughing, and like, of course, it can be humorous. I can appreciate that.
I mean, like, you have to understand that it is speaking to the other end. Like, it is
Yeah,
for the people who do not
yeah,
speak the way. Only for the people who do understand the symbolism aspect of things. For them, you don't need to go into the details. It doesn't,
yeah.
the timber arms, it doesn't have to mean exactly,
And
yeah,
the other set of people
they don't understand anything.
immediately take to it.
Yeah.
The next day, they are like, Temba his arms wide. Ala de do.
So that's the reason I don't remember a whole lot of things. I cannot tell you a whole lot of details from Star Trek. This I do
Oh,
remember.
it's because I rewatched this episode. I've
No, no,
rewatched
no.
this episode
Even
like
for
10,
me,
11 times.
I,
Last was 2 weeks back.
I see, I see. Like, so completely understood. But that goes to show, like, I am averse. Like, I don't want to remember a lot of things. But this I do remember. I don't have an option. I don't have a choice. This represents so much of me that it is worth remembering as is, right? Because as you said, this works as a litmus test to find out that exact set of people. Either they already know, or when they first exposed to it, would like, oh yes, this this is it. So in either of the cases, the point that I was trying to make is that that difference, the contrast is really stark. And even though in that particular uh, in Star Trek there was a somewhat of a closure, somewhat of a resolution, in real world there actually isn't as much. One side would term the other side as clumsy and stupid and move on. That's practically what is it to it. What is there to it?
Yeah,
So
and like I guess what I'm trying to say is that I I kind of relate to that other species, and the initial, like in that same episode, like until Picard actually figures that out, others dismissing that we can't ever translate this language
yeah,
even with our sophisticated
yeah,
tooling, is the response that I have gotten from society when I spoke in abstracts.
yeah. So, which is why I always thought, like, instead of associating myself with that species, I always try to associate myself with Picard, because it is fundamentally like, if I am like, if I do understand that, good. But if I don't have the intent to understand that, if I completely live in a denial of this cannot be understood, then that's not the life I would want. I would want the
Yeah,
prospect of knowing the things that I don't know yet. Sometimes, at some level, I would be the people who do not understand or speak that exact kind of symbolism. At which point, I would want to have a mind open enough for them to for me to be allowed to download that thing. Anyways, where I was going with this, I was going with, yeah. So the percentages are really stacked up against that kind of communication. Um, it would be, this is one of those things that I would want to solve as well. Like, find more people
yeah,
around me who can see this and understand this, and understand that, okay, we have that person is not one off island, because that's how it manifests. Until you find somebody else like you on those kind of things, like for better part of your life, you basically don't know anybody else. You just end up thinking that you are screwed up in a some certain way, which was
yeah.
my case as well.
And that has been a very that I think in many a sense low days still reinforce that, like it has been practiced for so long that basically depressive spells just reinforce that thought. But somehow now, coming out of depression, the phases when I come out of depression, that goes away. So it tells me that it's an acquired trait. But
I think,
one of the
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, bolo.
আমি বলছিলাম যে I think one of the things that I hearing a story that was stories that what I understand is that you actually valued the people around you or surrounding you a lot more, their opinion and their perspective, and whether they understand you or not. I think that's a lot of
Well,
part of your pain, part of your pain, like
it
the
is,
reason
it
you're
is,
pained.
it is, and I think that is why the conscious choice to then reduce exposure kind of came to, because I operate on this obsessive learner mode. And to me, there was enough to learn from everyone and everything around me. I might be learning something different. So I saw different worlds. I saw different worlds in my family, in the neighbors' families, in my cousin's family, in school, at in the families of my other schoolmates. And I saw that there was enough to learn from all of these. And I looked at it as it's up to me to assimilate and make what I must out of those. And the downside of that was I was opening myself wide to even the drudge of the system,
Yep.
not realizing that at which point I have started like mimicking the same things that those people are telling me. Instead of being that observer, I have now become the person living that. So that is the kind of thing which needs either a full dissociation. So was my mental state at that point. That why did my brain go into dissociation? It needed some place to think quietly
Yeah.
outside all of this.
Yeah.
Now I realize how important that is in life, to actually distance myself as like, okay, let's deconstruct life, deconstruct to the point where there is nothing, and then build back from that and see what is it that I want to add. And that has worked out pretty well so far. So, which is why I said that my life experience would actually be validating the approach you are taking towards Rai. And it's simply that I had to choose that in the face of many other obstacles. And I would have very much preferred if those obstacles were not put in the first place.
Mm.
So, what I'm trying to say is that you might find, just like saying that, I felt like I understood English better after I learned programming because I understood logic and I could apply logic in that way. But at the same time, one of the things I felt like I would be good at, but I have never made the time to go into, is sign language, because I have trouble. I know it's a conscious drain of my energy when I'm verbalizing. So choosing to do like these long conversations are a conscious choice. I know that is how much I am draining. So I'm consciously aware of that. So what makes me that just makes me think that if somebody like Rai would be more open to understanding a sign language, not needing to verbalize, not needing to, work with things, and maybe just get better at that. I mean, just another form of expression and doesn't
Yeah.
hurt. You can learn any other language later. There is
Yeah.
that much more value behind it. But why I'm saying why sign language, it's not just the vocal processing. It's that sign language makes you think in certain abstractions, certain other category of abstractions, which don't directly map to your spoken language.
Right. Right. I think the influence right now. So she has blank slate in front of her. We don't restrict her from doing anything, practically speaking. She can do pretty much anything. We just observe, right? Um, what happens is that the form of entertainments she is consuming kind of dictates where she is going or things that she is practicing, etc., etc. So Nakamu as like a girly Nakamu, those kind of things, she picks up now. So again, that's a weird longer story. Like how the gender norm gets imposed on, essentially. We were trying to keep it as fluidic as possible. Like, okay, we are not never going to tell you who you actually are until unless you figure that part out, right? So what ended up happening is that at the playground, she had to assume a gender in order to proceed forward because the kids did not know how to treat, and the kids were given that from their parents. And also basically uh, it had to be applied on in order to proceed forward. It was becoming a blocker. It still is a blocker. Like, I don't understand why that is the case, but that is the case. I was trying to find out, like, where does that gender identity come from? Like, how do you end up deciding that you're one or not the other? Are you
But I can share my experience here, and again, maybe this would be parallel a
maybe?
lot,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
least if
Go
not
ahead.
parallel, that some use case, let's say, um, case studies. So the way I have come to understood gender, I have always been this confused kid, right? Because something that I feel was very different from what others told of me, and I have gone through phases. I've gone through my gender rebel phase, where I was like, I'm strongly trans. Then I went through, and that was like my late teenage. Then it was like, oh no, I have to identify as this cis man in order to be accepted into the society. Then again went into fuck that. uh, but at that fuck that, I mean, in between was this trying really really hard to play the game by the rules, to see for once. I mean, that was like
That's
my college days,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
right?
You trust the
That
system way too much.
no. I'm at that. I don't trust it now. I'm just saying at that point it was like, okay, it looks like my way is not working. I'm clearly not getting across. I'm just causing more confusion. And then my college days were like, let's play by the rules, and I realized that, like, I got tired of that very quick. That's not working out.
Yeah.
But how I describe my understanding of gender now is that it's a function. It's just like I think of morality, that it's a computed function. You throw in parameters, I'm going to give you an output. So my favorite way of saying is that my gender today or my gender now is this, like a bouncing volleyball, let's say. But what I'm trying to say is that, however, hit a roadblock, that approach. And I realized that there is a certain value in
Hmm.
templatizing to my
Yeah.
nearest possible accepted thing. It's kind of like having avatars,
Hmm.
like in a game, you
Yeah.
have created a certain avatar, and I'm like, okay, is in this scenario, this is how I represent. So now, how I represent my gender is I consider myself non binary, and I consider myself non binary from the very fact that I believe in breaking down binaries unless it is computing. Uh, so in that sense, binary is just a matter of solidified state. Is there an influx? But then if you break down the
I mean,
binary,
binary is the most bare basic solid form, the crystal
yeah,
form that
so my
somebody stupid person can understand. So basically, that's why it helps to keep it that
yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
It's
So
most
in
simple
this
way.
sense, I'm just tying this back, that this ties back to my understanding of nonsense that I said at the beginning of this discussion, right? It is beyond sense. So in that sense, when I'm talking of non-binary, it is basically, it's not saying that it's not to be interpreted as not two. It
Hmm.
is to be interpreted as something that cannot be confined to two, because it is beyond that. It is beyond two. Okay.
I have,
So
yeah.
then,
Go
just let me
ahead.
wrap this up.
Yeah.
So the way I express my gender now is that I would like to understand the recipient and portray according to that. So there are some thumb rules I go by in terms of pronouns. If it is an English speaking audience, I insist on they, them, because there the necessity to break down binaries is that much more important in the usage of pronouns. Um, but when I am talking to a native Bangla speaker and they ask me what pronouns do you use, my answer to them is anything you want, because my mother tongue does not have a concept of gendered pronouns. So I don't see the value of introducing an artificial thing there, because Bangla does not need pronouns. But the moment I'm talking to somebody outside the Bangla thing, or outside a language, or especially in a language that heavily genders the pronouns, and like, then I would be like, here, just please be conscious of this. But then also there is a matter of presentation. So the gender is an identity. There is a presentation. There is, as in the internal and the external aspect of it, um, as well. So the presentation part, I realized that there are certain ways of presenting myself in public, like given our current legislation,
Hmm.
all my documents carry mail, and I am okay with that. I used to be very upset with that, but now I'm okay with that, because I am taking this within the confines of this system. That in a system that casts me into two buckets, I have to reach the most acceptable form unless I explicitly agree at some point to present myself as trans. But in my daily presentation, and again, this is where I have a beef with most of the queer community, which is also why I never gel well with the queer community, and I've tried, the majority of them, is I do not have the time to work on my presentation, because there is a natural way in which things happen and I let that slide. So at which point my presentation comes off as mostly male. But then when I'm conscious, it again, it's on the audience. So I'm kind of that much, I have templatized this to the point. So what I'm saying is, it's probably important to explain to Rai that within that context, even if you are choosing to represent yourself as a girl, it's important to remember that it is within that context. Do not identify that with your
Yes.
identity.
Yes. Yes. So that part. So the entire part about is that an immutable part of my identity? We always gave her enough solid grasp to hold on to that it isn't if you don't want it to. I am not going to shape you in any one way or the other. If you want like the binary identity to be yours, be my guest. If you don't want to be, that's also fine. I don't care. I wouldn't I wouldn't give you a weapon in either direction or not. If you ask questions, I'll give you the answer. And
Yeah,
so my personal way of understanding this, like at the way I would represent myself, is that it's more like a HSL scale, like RGB instead of
it
RGB,
is. It
HSL,
is.
right?
It's kind of like HSL, right? Because the L is the thing that is often overlooked.
So I knew that you were going for that as well. That's why I've said this, because not only gender, also for sexuality, I think I can have that much, that it's not about the exact which value of the color wheel you're choosing. It matters a whole lot how the saturation and luminosity affects. What if you are a red and you have a very high saturation, but the luminosity is zero? The outward expression would be black. You would not be presented as red, you would be black in that case, right? So that is where I think my identity falls in. I am very much like I'm in love with that androgynous representation of stuff. Like you have probably never seen me project myself as like overly manly man or overly feminine like man or some whatever that is. Like I don't go. It's not that. It's like basically I reject the concept of having that as a strong quality. That is not the strong part of my identity. I am various other things, and I would choose anywhere on the spectrum as long as the luminosity is zero. So it doesn't matter whether I'm red or blue or green. Luminosity is zero means I'm black, and that's the part. Like if that's all you need to know. Move on. Let's talk about something else that I find more interesting. And stuff. I'm not saying that this is not interesting. I'm just saying that that's where from childhood, since childhood, I never really wanted to put so much value into it. So a lot of people complain that তোর দাঁড়ি এত দেরি
Yeah,
করে ওঠে কেন? Didn't bother me. Like eventually I got daddy golf. Like even it's probably a little bit less than you should. Right? But the point is, like it never was a problem for me. Like my identity was not like আমার গলা কেন এত ভারী না, আমার দাড়ি কেন এত চাপ নয়. That never really bothered me. Or do I need to like present the presentation part? Do I need to do that in order to present myself some the other end? That also didn't bother. So either of the cases, that so I am very comfortable and happy with that null kind of in a way, right? So and I'm fine with this. So I don't think anybody needs anybody else's approval for this matter, or even like the what do you call that thing?
yep. And after like 10, 12 years of trying to
Yeah,
identify my gender,
yeah,
sexuality, and having gone through the pretty much all the possible literature there I have access to, and I think you were very right. And I think I usually say no to this, but I have to humble up and accept that yeah, a lot of my earlier actions in life have been motivated by pleasing others, pleasing or accepting the people immediately around me,
yeah.
and I don't think I can change it. I don't think I can change it, which means my only option is to
Find
choose
the right set
who
of people. Yeah,
who's around me,
yeah.
right?
I
So
agree.
um you remember Moss Fest or something in London? There was this thing that Larissa had done. This I'm not sure if you were in that session. I think it was one of those London sessions. Rabimbu was there. To remember, she got people to stand in a line, and there was this take a step forward if you agree, or backward if you disagree. And there was this question of if you don't identify as a cis het person or something, and I stepped back, and there were people like, "What you?" And like, huh, yeah, like, and then people like, "Oh, we thought you were this extroverted, very handsome man." And like, the only thing I'm willing to take from that statement is handsome.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
I'm willing to take. Okay, so but see, the point is that I'm just trying to tell you that you have not lost much. My entire study into this, trying to really understand things, because it feels like there is something really big happening here in the way that people are expressing their gender, sexuality, the expression. I love Pride. I have been into one or two of those marches. I love that. I love the openness that happens within that,
Yeah.
knowing
That's what we're
that this is that
celebrating.
contextual boundary.
Mm.
Outside, this is not safe. But the thing that I could not take into account was that there is this understanding, and again, this is a criticism of the majority of the queer people I have come across, that you got to show it, that you got to flash it,
You gotta
and
celebrate it.
you
You
got
gotta
to
celebrate it.
celebrate it. And I do, boss, I do. But here is what this process is taking a very small, it's running on low priority. There's a thread running. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
keeping a check.
Exactly. I'm very like weird. It gets weird to how do I project it, because but I 100% agree what you're saying here is that from priority wise perspective, there are all the other things that I'm very much more interested about than this. I have no disrespect for it, or even like I understand, but I'd
Yeah.
rather put that in the back of my head and move on
And
with other things in
then
life.
which look at that. I'm just talking of what it, why does my color schemes when I design something go to red and black? There is a reason, and the reason is this: कि I want to choose the luminosity level based on the interaction, based on the person, based on the subject at hand or the situation at hand. If I want to show you the colors as they are at that point, all I got to do, boss, is increase the luminosity slider. But first, I need to verify that you are worth it, or that I am feeling I like dark. I like the lack of light. It helps me think.
Yeah,
There are many
yeah,
variations. So if you want to plot the gender on a certain spectrum, also include my willingness to divulge that or to take that as a primary topic.
yeah, yeah.
But here I am discussing gender in a way that I typically would bypass. Like I have learned that I don't need to educate others. I also went through this phase where I was this vocal proponent and something was not right. And what was not right, it felt like, being an anchor for Republic TV. I mean, yeah, I am on the news. Yeah, I am shouting, but is this worth the news? I mean, yeah, it appeals to a lot of people, but is this worth the news? So, in that sense, the worthiness, remember last session, we had this discussion what is worth doing?
Yeah,
On that worthiness scale, this is not something to ignore.
yeah,
It is something to prepare and let it stay.
yeah,
It will step in. It is
yeah,
a bounding function.
yeah,
It will step in if that part gets over, like somebody forces
yeah,
something out.
yeah. I think one of the good analogies, like at least to me, in my mind, it sounds like a good analogy, is that some people need like being told over and over I love you, as in form of like hey, to make it hit home, like, and constant reminder of like hey, you are loved, somebody else loves you, essentially. For them it's necessary in that way. For me it doesn't seem necessary. Does not mean the love is not there, right? It's the same
Yeah,
way
and
that
then that is
celebration is the
like,
exact same way.
yeah,
I don't need to be reminded or remind anyone for that thing to be exactly that same way. It's just that I don't need
yep.
to celebrate it on a, or like put it forward for everybody else. I don't need that. It's inside my head. Whether you approve of it or disapprove of it doesn't matter. I couldn't care either way, which was the point I was getting to. Like I really didn't care what others think, like to
And
pathological
that,
level.
my friend, is the fundamental difference, which is why I said that I better own up to this,
Yeah,
is there is no other way of understanding the
yeah,
differences in your and my
yeah,
approach.
yeah. I cared very less about what others thought about, and I think the credit goes to my dad essentially, because at child, like when you are a kid, your worldview is forming as if there is the ideal high state of some kind, somebody you're trying to idealize. At that point, if that somebody actively breaks it down to you that idealism is a plague, you should, in a way, like if you want more bandwidth, you start being skeptical. And at the void of all of it, like after being skeptical and trying all different ways to question that thing, you still couldn't break it, that's a pretty good thing. Then it probably, it's worth being a fan of. But everything eventually kind of breaks down at some point. Anyways, the point is, like, I do make mistakes. That was my dad's thing, like I do make
Yep.
mistakes, right? So when that was like, I want to idolize this person, this person is somebody I can idealize more than anybody else that I can see, but this person is actively going out of their way to prove that they also make mistake. Then how much others do? And at that point, can I take anybody's any words for granted? Everything is basically nebulous until proven. I'm not gonna, this is not something that I'm committing to memory. I heard what you're saying. I'll come back to it in 3 days, maybe. In between, I'll ask around. So in that way, never nobody said to me was immediately committed. I felt good or bad or anything. It didn't really matter. Most of the time, it's like, okay, yeah, that was yet another stupid thing, for the lack of a better resolution. Like, that is true in most cases. Only when this is, you take that as an assumption, that's only when. And for them, probably that's the baseline. I don't mind. But for me, I now know where does that fall down, right? So in that way, I never cared about that, included teacher and everybody else. My point, my problem ended up becoming, am I a pathological, like am I like what are
Like
my
the perfect
personality?
sociopath.
Yeah, so how much of a sociopath am I? And the point is that I cannot discuss with anybody. I had to go on out of my way to find out books and resources about what are the traits of a psychopath, what are the, how do, and then what I eventually realized is that, again, if you go by executive functions, there are lots of psychopathic tendency in various different people. What ended up happening, I understood very early in my life, like 12, 13, around that time, is that good faith, as in not trying to act as if you are trying to harm somebody, is one of the best thing that you can do to not become the monster that you don't want to be. And like that was pretty much it. Like once that was the understanding, that one of the baseline like maxim or assumptions, that hey, knowingly, so my interpretation was, I wouldn't do something that I cannot with pride explain to my grandkids. So if I'm doing something, anything, if I cannot take pride in doing that, to explain to my grandkids, because a lot of stupid things I will do, and as long as I'm able to laugh at that end, like at the end part of my life, so this is a stupid, not malicious, right? So even if I do stupid things, that's fine. Malicious, not fine. I shouldn't do that. And that was my cutoff. If I cannot explain that with pride to my grandkids, that's what I don't do. That defined a lot of things that I have or haven't done in my life. But that's what it boiled down to in my understanding of the understanding of bona fide, like understanding of good faith. I did not know that by that term or understanding or knowledge. I just understood that sometimes people end up doing things that are way too selfish, and they know that they just would create justification for it, weave justification for it, in order to absolve themselves of that. I wanted to know that, hey, I am actively making a mistake here. So that's the part that only helped me. Um, yeah, I think last 20 years almost has been just like not a lot of other things, just trying to understand myself better and better and better.
Yeah, like I said, 5 years old, that was the counter. Like that was the limit I hit in life. And then, you know what? This calls for a complete reset. It seems like certain things were working and things broke very badly. And now there is a need for a complete reset because there is this underlying hunch that something I'm not paying attention to. And the something I was not paying attention to was this constant voice that I was suppressing in order to what I thought, adapting to the environment.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, anyhow, this was illuminating in many ways, and in many sense, this kind of, um, I guess, validates what I thought about you.
Hmm.
Um, and oh, I just looked at the photo that you shared.
Oh, so when you talked about that lollipop trees, that was the first watercolor. Mine. That one was, and I was forced to put more colors. It was very faded. I increased the saturation as well, like as in while uploading. I was very much like the saturation was really faded thing, and also like the tent is tent, and the trees are lollipops in a sense. I posted it a long time back when we were talking about that.
Whether I had seen, but then I had seen and parked it. I'll come back to that. But yeah, that is how brain operates, right? So see, um, I don't know how to tie this back, because I don't think there is any point in tying this back as much as taking the complexity of everything that we have been talking of. And the only valid summary that I guess you can make of everything that we have discussed is kind of boiling down to the fact that, what was it that Shukumar Rai really retained in his writing? It's that childishness, so to say, the ability, the tennisness, the fluidity. And if I am to expand the maxim that has kind of come at this point from, that it's okay to forget, it's never okay to stop thinking or analyzing, but it's terribly important to remember certain things. And at all times, the only principle worth dying for is retaining fluidity, is retaining the ability to change. And sublating sublation, okay. pretty much pretty much this, right? I see you have, okay, dialectic oscillation. I can just get what you can want to say from the headings.
Uh,
Pretty much, yes.
yeah.
I was I was going for this, but um
No,
the
summarize, summarize. That was actually pretty good. Keep going.
yeah. And so this has kind of boiled down to this one set of principle, that how do I understand the concept of liberty, the concept of justice, is also through this lens. And if you remember me saying that I hold on to this fact that collective human consciousness or collective human memory is spontaneous, that humanity forgets way more often than we want to think we do. And there is value in that forgetting. That forgetting is just making space for something new to occupy that. For me, the composting of food materials through fungus into soil is a sort of forgetting. Through me, death is a form of forgetting.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, the ability to um, analyze, like when I say analyze, I mean,
Assimilate.
what is it but observe
Mm.
and understand? And that small, that's what, that ting that goes on. I would like to think it is as primal as, you know if you ever find yourself in that dark dark night in a forest where you can't see anything, you don't have a light with you.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that happens is your other senses get stronger.
Heightened.
You sense the wind. At that point, it is okay to not see. It's when then next you encounter light, the light feels blinding, to the point that you realize that the majority of the universe is dark. And it is not dark because there is no light. It is simply dark because we have so far looked at it through this lens of perceiving photonic particles into our eyes, observing them through these certain lenses, which is why the first time an X-ray imaging was taken, people were like, how is there so many things?
Yeah.
And if one thing an astrophysicist will tell you is there are so many different wavelengths to observe the universe in.
Yeah. False color
That was probably,
distortion. Yeah.
yeah. And there are so many ways we don't know yet.
Yeah.
So, what is the one thing that we absolutely must ensure that happens, especially if, let's say, I would like to think that uh, the contribution to the human evolution, like at one point, I used to be that very strong classic textbook misanthrope and say, like, I got nothing to do with evolution. But now I kind of realize the evolutionary responsibility in a certain different way. There is, of course, procreate, push your genes forward, carry on the human line. Lucky for me, there are many others doing that. I can choose not to. So again, it's that focus,
The
that it's
the
that
only
trade-off.
reason, yeah, of course, but the only reason that I chose to, like, I understand exactly what you're
Oh
saying.
no, again, I
Yeah.
am the one thing I was very glad is that you chose to have a kid because I was like, here a specimen like me has chosen so experimental conditions available without having
Damn
to
it.
invest.
God damn it.
I was like, which I just want to point out. This is the value of a collective upbringing. That the reason why communities, kids who grow up in communities tend to be that much more well-rounded emotionally or empathically, the sharp edges that we have had to
Mm,
smoothen out over our lifetimes that we will continue to, and we will never reach the sort of smoothness that, let's say, your kid is going to go into never having that sharp edge in the first place because it began with that well-roundedness, right? Is that uh, the evolutionary responsibility is also to carry on this knowledge that change is essential.
yeah.
And if you are to sum up that whole maxim that I told about the life, it boils down to this, that change is essential at every point. Ensure that change is possible, no matter however written in stone. If anything is written in stone, make sure you have something to break that stone down.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay to write in stone. It's okay. Why is it okay to write in stone? Is you want something to last longer than other things which take relatively lesser time.
Yeah.
But as long as we are bound by time, as long as we are bound by this
Entropy.
universe moving towards the entropy
Mm,
state, we are still bound by certain finite conditions. And one of them is
decay.
that you cannot stop change. So why fight it?
Yeah.
Which is why the best way, it's not about swimming upstream or downstream, bro. It is completely about, do you have the fucking boat? And then something might happen because of which the stream reverses. Can you respond to that change? If you were very strongly going upstream, 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 the moon starts rotating the other way around, the earth starts spinning the other way around, gravity flips, another earth comes on top of the earth, and suddenly your stream goes upstream. And like, the point is this, ki, why is it okay to forget? It's okay to forget because the only way to allow change within a finite state machine, that is our brain, is to free up circuits for change. The reason it is not okay to stop thinking and analyzing is because situations may change. You cannot take something that was true or known to be true earlier. If you face that again, you got to reevaluate. Even if you come to the same answer, you keep on reevaluating. Might not be looking at it fine enough that you spot the finer decimal points. Why is it okay to why is it absolutely critical to remember certain things? Is that it is okay, it's absolutely necessary to remember how did you bring about change the last time you encountered something like this. which again boils down to the final part, that fluidity. So if you then take this, apply it to gender, it means that fluidity is of paramount importance. You apply it to justice, it means the ability to reinterpret that fast enough so that by then the situations have not changed under which things had come in. That a justice process of justice that takes too long is a outdated process.
Exactly the challenge with justice system is right now. The world moves
Yeah,
too fast for it to be caught
but
up.
that does not mean that you compromise on your variables and arrive at a simpler form of justice. It does not mean that justice has to be handed out right then. What I'm saying is increase your computation power, increase the ability to parallelly process multiple things. And it is this ability to parallel process that again ties back to why brains like mine, or probably yours and many other people like us, tend to ignore the finer details of life in favor of observing the complexity. The only way to observe the complexity is to distance yourself, to be able to broaden your field of vision,
Bird's eye view.
or rather, to get more things into your field of vision. Um, yeah, I think that's the only way that I can sum up what we
Yeah.
talked.
So that's fantastic, by the way. The one only reason I was bringing out that document is because part of it about what you were saying, that what the childishness, the neoteny,
Yeah,
one, the antithesis of the will to power is will to play. I was showing in that section is that how will to power, so will to power and will to play are not so. Shukumar Rai is basically celebrating that will to play in a very rough sense. My point was they are not, they're basically axis like where those are two different extremes, but actually they live on a balance. Both need to be there. The will to power and the will to play both need to be there, because what is will to power is the exercise to play, like the sorry exercise of power is the will to play. If you want to play, that means what you're capable of and allowed to play. So similarly, what is will to power? The intent to play. Why would you want to like amass power? Is that you want to see some certain thing to happen. That is your play, and because you see the threat in it, like I am not allowed to do that. How do I ensure that I am allowed to play? Is that how you go on about it? The will to power. So, anyways, that's the part I was trying to show, is that the relationship between those two things, the necessity for one or the other, even though at its core, at my core, I'm very much of a will to power kind of person, like on a pathological level. The exposure to Shukumar Rai opened me up to seeing that other side where the will to play is necessary. It's not one dimensional. The dimensionality of it, the the spectrum, I need to see that, and I need to position myself well enough not to become an extremist of either of the sides, because that's what ends up happening. All the dictatorship, all the like what do you call that thing, like authoritative like approaches to life, as well as a bigger like to state, to company, to running anything, basically boils down to people seeing it at a very one dimensional way and not having enough understanding the will to play part. So I think for anybody in a leadership role, they should be exposed to this will to play in their own languages. But to me, Shukumar Rai helped in that sense. That's the part that I was trying to bring back on. So there, it had other parts as well, the oscillation part of things. I wanted to discuss that, but I think we are too late for this. Let's push it back to the next week.
I don't mind.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I don't wanna associate this discussion with a sense of exhaustion.
I'm I think I'm like 5 hours away from exhaustion.
This that's okay. That's
But
okay. Oh, let's
yeah.
let's break it off here, and let's
Hmm.
look forward to the next one. So the next one is where I would want to talk about the concept of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and how it is missing one parameter, the hypothesis, and why that is necessary, why it is somewhat incomplete without, and why having it is actually really, really more complete from a scientific or technological perspective. Like that's the analogy that I'm gonna bring it down to essentially. Uh, so let's look at it next week.
Yep.
All right. So that's it for this week. Let's catch back up next week. I'm gonna stop the